Ο δεύτερος εισηγητής μας είναι ο διδάκτορας Φίλιππος Τάουνερ, κοσμήτορας στο Ινστιτούτο Nida της Νέας Υόρκης. Ο τίτλος της εισήγησής του, το λέω στα ελληνικά, είναι από το αρχαίο κείμενο στη σύγχρονη μετάφραση, ο Eugene Nida και η στροφή στην εξουσία στις μεταφραστικές σπουδές. Παρακαλώ τον κύριο Τάουνερ να ανεβεί στο βήμα. Please, Dr. Towner, the floor is yours.
Eminences, fellow priests, pastors, and esteemed leadership of the church, elder brothers and colleagues, forerunners in translation, sisters and brothers, friends. I would like to thank the conference organizers for this opportunity to join with you in celebrating 25 years of the New Testament in modern Greek. My contribution to the larger conversation of this conference will come in the form of what is really something of a briefing on the history behind the Nida Institute's role in the ongoing work of the Hellenic Bible Society. There lies behind this collaboration two lines of scholarly development that are merging together and producing mutual benefits. That of Bible translation theory, and that of what is really a polydiscipline called translation studies. And at the center of this history, or behind it somewhere, is the translation scholar Eugene Nida, whose life and the New Testament in modern Greek have much in common. I'll describe translation studies and its history briefly in a moment, and we'll examine briefly one of its current emphases. And we'll do this by considering some of Eugene Nida's theory and practice. But I want first to underscore the broad question that has stimulated the thinking of the Nida Institute over the past 10 to 15 years. It has shaped the way we conceive of the activity of translation. There is a question, though. What can a discipline developed in a secular context, practiced largely by scholars who are quite allergic to anything that has to do with the Bible, what can this discipline offer Bible translation? It is this question that we have spent many years now, 10 to 15 at least, many in my way of measuring a profession and a career. We've been considering this question, and eventually I'll get to an answer. As we have considered the question, we have pursued research into translation studies. We're constantly finding ways in which Eugene Nida seems to have gotten there first. He has anticipated developments that would come in other fields. He has himself given expression to nuances, developments, or what has come to be called turns, paradigms, in the development of translation studies. There's one particular turn or paradigm still at work defining translation studies that I want to focus on this evening, and that is the so-called power turn. This will make sense in a moment. Then I'll consider some of its possible implications for Bible translation. Finally, I want to close with something of a case study designed to demonstrate that power turn in an instance of Bible translation as it occurred in the revision of the 1926 Vietnamese Bible. First, to the power turn itself. This polydiscipline of translation studies is a network of discourses whose scholarly conversation and definition have been evolving from the middle of the 20th century. It is partly the outgrowth of another, more widely known scholarly discipline called comparative literature. which of course made translations of literature a laboratory in which to observe trends and movements of literature, foreign literature, across cultures. Essentially, translation studies and the scholars who pursue this line of research took what was generally regarded to be a low-level, rather ordinary and rudimentary function, namely translation. Not a very creative thing, just a job that needs to be done, often regarded as what we say in America as hack work. Anyone can do it, a sort of necessary evil if there was to be commerce and communication between cultures. Translation studies scholars have taken this idea, reassessed it as a cultural phenomenon. Translation itself became an object of scholarly observation, and as it turns out, a number of conclusions which would be drawn from translation studies scholars are proving to have a direct bearing on how we think of and perform the translation of the Bible. Now, I will say, as a scholar, I'm in love with the ancient text. As a priest, I'm in love with the people of my parish who have no access to that ancient text. As a translator, I stand between the two, much like a traffic policeman directing traffic, allowing the movement of information from the ancient text to get into the parish, into the ears, and into the hearts of the people that I work with. And this is a strange place to be in the middle. My mother told me, never stand in the middle of the road because you are likely to get run over. And translators have been run over all their lives. Now, as in the case of many academic disciplines, as this one has evolved, it has gone through a number of paradigm shifts, called by one scholar the various turns or developments of translation studies. Translation studies emerged after World War I because of after World War II in the European context because of the growing need of translation in a vastly changed landscape in Europe. This period of enormous practical need for translation of all kinds of documents and discourses, reaching right up to the 1970s, came to be called the pragmatic turn. Translation was something that simply needed to be done. Translation studies assumed the status of an academic discipline as it began to study how translation was done, why it was done, who was doing it, and what the results were. Then in the 1980s came the so-called cultural turn. As a result of the preceding study, research, publications, translation came to be viewed as not simply a matter of pragmatics, the pragmatics of international communication, but as a cultural activity in its own right. During this period, several features of the cultural activity of translation emerged with clarity. Translation was generally thought of in this paradigm as cultural transfer, the movement of value-laden information across cultural boundaries by the application of the forces of localization, moving from one language to another, granting access to something foreign. More recently, translation has also come to be thought of as a form of human cognitive activity. It is something we are doing all the time. You are engaging in translation right now, if I've not put you to sleep already. Translation is a human condition. It is not something exceptional. It occurs in all spaces of human life and communication. But from the 1990s up to the present, translation studies has been undergoing its power turn, as especially identified by the post-colonial and the feminist critiques. The activity of translation came to be viewed as a means of exerting power. Social power, cultural power, religious power, cognitive power. Scholars who lived in situations of colonization and oppression, often on the wrong side of power, had come to understand that translation was often used against them to support the colonial, or in some cases, the male-dominant status quo. In response, they employed translation themselves in ways that resisted the colonial translation. They translated in such a way that shed light on their uniqueness, their otherness, their value among human beings. They used translation as a tool of liberation. They would demonstrate that power is transacted and negotiated all across the translation activity, and that even those on the wrong side of asymmetrical relations could have their own access to power in translation and writing. If a colonial story could be reinforced by translation, it could also be subverted by translation. How did this present power perspective come to prominence in translation studies? The decisive focus on translation as an exercise of power resulted from the gathering of tendencies that began to assert themselves in various fields of discourse from the middle of the 20th century. The work of Michel Foucault compelled scholars in a variety of disciplines to consider how power flowed through cultures and what it was producing. There in the world of commerce, there was the growing awareness by the middle 20th century of something that would later be called westernization, fostered consciously and unconsciously through the deft use of mass communication technology. In such a context, translators learned that they could manipulate audiences through translation to reach particular goals. Within translation studies, an introductory essay by two scholars connected power to translation. Their argument was simple. Since the production of translations is central to culture, translation studies scholars must enter the discussion about the exercise of power in culture. Descriptive translation research then began to analyze translations to discover how they produced their effects. The power of translation was coming more fully into view. Throughout the world, so much was changing. Technology and media raising the visibility of power in politics and culture. The colonial experiment was coming to an end, rapidly in some contexts, more gradually in others. In the USA, the growing protest against American involvement in Vietnam was part of a larger questioning of expansionism throughout the world, whether American and democratic or Soviet and communist. Awareness of the political and social structures of power became even more pronounced with the dismantling of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War. The post-colonial voice grew louder and louder. Globalization of the economies and cultures of the world became a reality to ponder. The polydiscipline of translation studies expanded into the spaces opened up by politics and communication. Low-country translation scholars wrote of the manipulation of literature. A larger group of scholars formulated a program to consider the norms that shaped translation practice, both literary and non-literary. Some would eventually develop the ever-changing experimental workshop for graduate and postgraduate students that would be called CETRA. Scholars such as Gideon Toury, Theo Hermans, José Lambert, Susan Basnet, Maria Tomasco. And spinning off from this activity would eventually be the Nida School of Translation Studies, held annually in Misano Adriatico, Italy, of which I am happily one of the co-directors. These and other scholars showed how translations were not secondary works, but often primary tools that institutions of all sorts deployed to shape and manipulate the components of culture and eventually arrive at the kind of culture they wanted. From governments to churches, from universities to kings, institutions would fund translations to shore up their own ideologies and secure cultural power. Keeping in step with the developments in social and political theory in the last decade or two of the 20th century, movements or clusters of translation studies scholars appeared in situations in which power relations are now under close consideration. in Canada, Brazil, China, the Balkan countries. And a most significant movement for the emergence of power from the cultural turn is made up of those who employed post-colonial theory within their practice of translation. Also, in the 90s, a Harvard scholar, Homi Bhabha, famed for his approach to culture studies, introduced the notion of translational culture. Culture itself understood as a way of conceptualizing or redefining translation, in which migrant and hybridized cultures or populations, characteristic of the postmodern world, came to be viewed themselves as mediators of something new in culture. Translation for Bhabha is the site for cultural production, the space where newness enters the world. Power has become a key concept and a lens through which to observe translations. Viewed from the angle of people who exercise power, the theme of agency now appears alongside power. As one scholar concludes, because translators are the ones who construct meaning in translated texts, it follows that translators are meaning makers, and that in this capacity they wield themselves considerable power. They have great responsibility and exercise an important agency. As this view of translation takes hold, an agenda emerges to empower local translators because they are the ones who can be agents of change. In some cases, agents of resistance, agents of the cultural other. That is, translators are the ones who wield this power. What does Eugene Nida have to do with any of this? Eugene Nida conceived of this reality in relation to Bible translation in somewhat different terms, and this shouldn't surprise us. The point I would make as we shift our consideration to Nida, to Bible translation and the power turn, is that the approach to translation pioneered by Eugene Nida and developed thereafter in the Bible Society context around the world, where modern contemporary translations were desired, in many ways reflects decisions and priorities that will have similar, perhaps parallel effects in the world of the church, in the world of the church coming out of colonial captivity in places like Africa and Latin America and Asia. Sometimes his work laid the groundwork for the translation studies scholars to come, whether this is acknowledged or not. I recently reread the closing chapter of Philip Stein's biography of Eugene Nida. It is there that Stein responds to the critics of Nida and his dynamic or functional equivalence approach. In short, many secular translation scholars came to the view that Nida functional equivalence approach was just another way of looking at what they called ethnocentric violence. Why? Because they viewed the contemporary language, domesticating approach, as they called it, of Bible translation as deceptive, designed as a propagandizing methodology to dupe unsuspecting audiences. This doesn't surprise us, but it is there. I won't really give answer to it, but I think in this context we understand that the mission of the church is not about propaganda, but about changing lives. In terms of the power element in translation, what is often not seen clearly by his critics is how Nida put power into the hands of target audiences, into the hands of the local people. Nida was no post-colonial critic, and he did not overtly think in terms of the concern for the other, as it's come to be called today, not in those terms. Yet it is clear that he moved the dial in a direction that translation studies and post-colonial translation would eventually follow. There are certain key features of the Nida approach, generally adopted and developed by the United Bible Societies, that set it apart from the approaches of other Bible agencies, at least in the beginning. I would suggest that many of these features can be seen as moves in the direction of the localities, away from the West and the North, and into the non-West and the global South. While I can't say or see that Nida leaned in this direction out of any post-colonial sentiment, certain features of his program have implications for power. It is difficult to decide which features should be named in this, and I don't want to lead us into some fantasy of Eugene Nida as the liberator of the oppressed. But some examples bear consideration. First, most obvious as an example of a move that has implications for the issue of power, who wields it, where it resides in a translation situation. This comes to the fore in a fundamental criterion associated with Nida's translation program. The needs of the audience take priority in addressing the various translation questions. In fact, as he developed, tested, and further defined and refined dynamic equivalence, target audience, already more visible simply by virtue of the fact of his constant physical presence among them in so many teaching situations, necessarily featured more and more. His growing interest in culture studies ensured likewise that he would be regularly in a variety of target cultural situations. And of course, he was famous at American Bible Society in New York City, where he worked, as the member of the American Bible Society staff who was better known for his absence from New York than his presence. Those of us who would become translation consultants for the Bible Societies never thought much about this, because it came with the commitment to work. The work was done in the field, not at home, because it was a normal part of our work if the work was to be done in the context of the target or the receiving audience of a translation. But Nida was learning what makes perfect sense to us, namely that since naturalness of a translation is not a measurement that can be made outside of the culture by non-native speakers, proximity to the target is the only way to achieve this kind of success. Natural translations that will be used, that will be understood. The decision to include the target audience in a translation project, even if only by way of representation by selected target community members, amounted to empowerment of the locality. A feature developing from this, secondly, would eventually produce even more empowerment. Nida developed a translation training approach that was prescriptive and teachable. Translators came away from workshops with a methodology, with guidance for translational problem solving. And in the workshop setting, it could be taught to, learned and used by translators whose academic preparation for the work ranged from very marginal to exceptional. The applicability of this model to that wide range of students would facilitate the sharing of translation power among local translation teams and professional consultants. The next stage, which was already underway in a more or less formal shape, was training native speakers to be the actual translators. The program was teachable, and the advantages of training native speakers to do the work with their natural sensitivity to and understanding of culture and language was obvious, and this approach finally won the day. But this was a paradigm shift in translation. It was Nida in his first 2 decades or so with ABS, the American Bible Society, who trained missionaries to do the work of translation. But by the 80s, a change has come. The Bible Societies made it the official position that they would only publish translations drafted by native translators. Nida had been building a team of professional consultants to assist translation teams with expertise in the biblical languages and translation theory, linguistics, and the administration needed to organize and run the projects. But though the first consultants were Westerners, with high academic credentials and experience in non-Western settings, through a program of selection and scholarship, the emphasis in selection gradually shifted to non-Western candidates. When I was invited to join the Asia-Pacific team of United Bible Societies in 1995, I was told by my superintendent at the time that there would be no more Americans, period. I was the last. And I think that holds true. The only point I make here is that through the development of a translation approach that emphasized the target, the local culture, through developments in the translation team process that would come to focus on native speakers, and through the development of an increasingly non-Western team of translation professionals to support translation teams, what began with Nida and evolved after Nida served to shift the power in translation, in Bible translation, to the target audience. The establishment of the United Bible Societies, within which Nida took responsibility for coordinating and unifying translation, should also briefly be mentioned, for it would provide yet another vehicle for the distribution of power. A final observation concerning Nida and the location of power in the translation mission needs to be cited. This is Nida's commitment to foster what has come to be called interconfessionality. Interconfessionality does not necessarily have anything to do with translation. It is a larger, more fundamental concept. While I'm afraid some in the United Bible Societies are more sensitive and supportive of this interconfessional relationship building than others, in principle, this commitment is designed to have at least two relevant outcomes. In some locations, it may be possible to translate the Bible in such a way that Christians from a variety of church traditions could use the same translation, such as, I think, the New Testament in modern Greek. Thereby, as the theory goes, doors are opened for interconfessional understanding to develop, for those of one church to get to know and understand those of another church, not to change them, but to understand them, to find ways to work together in society. The other approach is one in which we think of interconfessionality not so much as working together on a particular project, but as the organization of the United Bible Society supporting all traditions, to work within their own traditions, to translate in the way that they feel they need to translate, to protect and to transmit their sacred tradition to the next generations. All of these innovations, and they were innovations, they moved translation and our understanding it away from what had been a dominant pre- and immediate post-World War II mission model to something that would open the doors for local translators and local churches to be involved. For the most part, it is probably true to say that Bible Society projects do not conform to the specific agenda of the power turn, described in terms of the deployment of power in translation for the purpose of resistance or subversion and expression of the voice of the other. These are ideals that really occur in many other kinds of discourses and contexts. But it does approve of this distribution of power as a final way of suggesting, how should I say this? What I want to do is make a transition here to a brief case study in which a power turn can be seen, or the sharing of power can be seen, even before the term was being used. In 1997, we held a translation workshop to build a team of translators and reviewers for the revision of the 1926 Vietnamese Bible. We had thought initially it would be easier to carry out this project in Los Angeles. Now, this is a crazy idea. A Bible for Vietnam done in Los Angeles. In terms of travel, it certainly would have been easier. It probably would have been cheaper, but it was not appropriate. However true, however convenient it would have been to have done the translation there, the revision was mainly undertaken to serve the church in Vietnam, not the Vietnamese church around the world. In the second year of the project, with that project now moved to Vietnam, I was in Vietnam in a checking session as a consultant, working with 3 Vietnamese members of the translation team. As I listened, one of them read aloud his draft translation of Galatians chapter 1. I was glancing at his work, and I was glancing at this old 1926 Bible to try to figure out what it was he was doing. And in both places, I discovered that whenever a particular Vietnamese word occurred, it was the word Tin Lan. You don't need to know much about the word, but the word Tin Lan, which means gospel, whenever it occurred, it was capitalized, a capital T. And this puzzled me. At that point, when I noticed this, I kind of tuned out what was going on, and I began to page through the Pauline letters, both in the revision that they were working on and in the old 1926 Bible. And I wondered, as I saw Tin Lan capitalized over and over again, was Vietnamese like German, which capitalizes its nouns? And I wondered what was going on. So I asked, finally, why is this word capitalized when so many other important words are not? And they said almost in unison, because it is capitalized in the 1926 Bible. Well, that's an easy thing to say. I said, well, okay. I pointed out, though, that the word God, Holy Spirit, and Spirit were often capitalized, but I assumed this was a kind of European or even American standard operating procedure for the Vietnamese churches. They agreed. But I told them I didn't understand why they would capitalize the word gospel. And I said that this revision was the opportunity to clean up some of the inconsistencies that they'd lived with for 75 years or so. They agreed, but what they told me was they planned to ensure that every occurrence of Tin Lan would be capitalized in the revision. They were going to clean this up. Well, this obviously still had not given me an answer. We discussed in a fairly calm and level-headed way, and I thought that they understood me. They told me they would think it over, and I sent them home for the weekend. During the weekend, I heard from the USA, from a Methodist Vietnamese minister, that this capitalization of Tin Lan was not acceptable. I didn't know why. He insisted that this capitalizing of Tin Lan be stopped, and it was an embarrassment for Vietnamese Methodist churches that this capital T show up in their Pauline letters. Well, Monday morning we got together again. Pastor Tio, the elder statesman of the group, said very calmly that they had discussed it and decided they were not willing to use a lowercase t. I showed them English translations, and I showed them the Greek text. Still, they would not do it. They said it would not be our Bible anymore. The T is capitalized, he said, because it is the name of our church, the Vietnamese Gospel Church. So, you can see what they did. Now I began to understand that what was at stake here was far more than any tiny translation decision. And he said to me, forget about the churches in California. We love our brothers in California. We love our Catholic brothers and sisters in this country. But this translation is for the Vietnamese Tin Lan Church. The capital T marks the Bible as our own Bible. This is the power turn. Now, it is the power turn because I let them get away with it, and I didn't feel like I could force a scholarly decision here on them that I regarded as more objective, more neutral. This was their Bible, this was their church. They made the decision, and with the approval of their church, with the simple crossing of the T up at the top instead of the middle, they inscribed their identity into this text. A simple use of power, but a determined and intentional use of power. Now, Eugene Nida laid the groundwork for a lot of developments in Bible translation, and I've not considered this work, his work, in semantic domains, semiotics, and other areas that would become central to translation studies inquiry, and how these might impinge on the issue of power and the usefulness of all of this for Bible translation. But the power turn, unnamed at the time, was already in effect in what Eugene Nida was rolling out as a translation mission in his focus on the power and the empowerment of the locality. At the outset of this presentation, I asked, what, if anything, does this polydiscipline of translation studies develop in a secular university, a Bible-unfriendly context? What does it have to offer Bible translation? The Nida Institute has become convinced that there is an answer to this question, and that it is an answer that can affect constructively how we think of the task of translation, how we train others to do it, and how we understand the effects and dynamics of translations in culture. Our basic approach to translation theory and scholarship, but also in developing the curricula we use in the training of translation teams and consultants, is to maintain a dialogue with translation studies scholarship, to draw from their observations what can be usefully applied. Of course, some aspects and certain trends of scholarship are more relevant than others. But if we consider for a moment the fundamental assertion of translation studies, that translation is a cultural activity that helps to shape human identity, if we consider that fundamental assertion alone, we have to admit its relevance for the work we do. For if it is the case that translation of all kinds is an important factor in the shaping of human identity, how much more is it true that Bible translation will affect the shape of Christian human identity, not just in our present, but also for the next generation of the church? With this goal in mind, the Nida Institute seeks to create the best translation training and support systems in terms of biblical and linguistic research, in theoretical framework that is informed by best developments in translation and communication studies, and making use of the best translation and teaching technologies that are available to ensure that the churches of the world can have translations of the Bible to do the work that they need to do to serve their communities and carry out their missions in the world. Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε τον δόκτορα Φίλιππο Τάουνερ. Έχουμε νομίζω 15 λεπτά χρόνο για να υποβάλουμε το μέγιστο, για να υποβάλουμε μερικές ερωτήσεις, αλλά όχι παρακαλώ τοποθετήσεις.
Ευχαριστώ κύριε Πρόεδρε. Ήθελα να κάνω μία ερώτηση και στους να ξεκινήσω από τον πρώτο ομιλητή, τον κύριο Καρακόλη. Αν κατάλαβα καλά την εισήγησή σας, νομίζω πως θεωρείτε λίγο πολύ αυτήν την ποικιλία των κειμένων που διαπιστώνεται μέσα στους αιώνες στη χειρόγραφη παράδοση της Εκκλησίας σαν επιδίωξη της Εκκλησίας. Είναι πράγματι μια επιδίωξη ώστε να μπορεί κανείς να αναζητήσει στη συνέχεια τους θεολογικούς λόγους αυτής της επιδίωξης ή μήπως ήταν τυχαίο. Το ρωτάω αυτό γιατί τα παραδείγματα που έρχονται στο μυαλό μου βεβαιώνουν ότι μάλλον υπήρξε μια σημαντική προσπάθεια επίτευξης ομοιομορφίας κειμένου. Αν πάρουμε το παράδειγμα του Οριγένη, αν πάρουμε την αναθεώρηση του Λουκιανού, αν πάρουμε τις προσπάθειες του Φιλόξενου κλπ. Βλέπουμε ότι μέσα στην ιστορία της Εκκλησίας υπήρξε αυτή η τάση της επίτευξης ενός ενιαίου κειμένου. Δεν ξέρω αν έχουμε αντίθετα παραδείγματα όπου η ομοιομορφία η ποικιλομορφία του κειμένου ήταν κάτι που προέκυψε ως επιδίωξη της Εκκλησίας. Concerning the paper of Phil Tanner, you mentioned as the first characteristic of the Nida translations theory that it takes into consideration the needs of the audience. Could these needs form also another type of power, like the example you mentioned with the Vietnamese translation, or the example of the translation into politically correct languages? Could we say that such translations in inclusive language or equal attempts are more honest than a translation that says that is an objective one.
Αν κάποιος άλλος επιθυμεί, ναι, κύριε.
Καθώς, κύριε Πρόεδρε, μας απαγορεύσατε να κάνουμε τοποθετήσεις, κατά ανάγκη τώρα αυτό που ήθελα να πω θα το κάνω υπό μορφή ερωτήσεως. Ότι, τι να κάνουμε. Αφού, λοιπόν, αυτή η δυσκολία του να είναι κανείς στο μέσον που ανέφερε ο κύριος Φιλ Τάουνερ, μεταξύ του κριτικού κειμένου που ως επιστήμον θα το ήθελε και του εκκλησιαστικού κειμένου που ως εργάτης της Εκκλησίας και υπεύθυνος θα ήθελε να το παρακολουθήσει εκείνο, την αισθανθήκαμε και εμείς μέσα στα πρώτα βήματα του μεταφραστικού έργου. Διότι πράγματι το κείμενο το κριτικό βέβαια είναι το κείμενο το οποίο χρησιμοποιεί όλη η επιστημονική κοινότητα, αλλά είναι ένα ευρυδικό κείμενο, όπως είπε ο κύριος Καρακόλης. Δεν είναι δηλαδή ένα κείμενο ζωντανό όπως είναι το εκκλησιαστικό κείμενο, το οποίο διαβάζονταν επί αιώνες και εξακολουθεί και διαβάζεται. Και με αυτό εδώ περνώ στο θέμα που θέλω να θέσω στον κύριο Καρακόλη, εφόσον υπομορφή ερωτήσεως μπορεί μόνο να γίνει. Λοιπόν, βλέπετε ότι στις νεότερες κριτικές εκδόσεις γίνεται μία, πώς να πούμε, προσαρμογή σε μερικές τουλάχιστον βασικές γραφές του εκκλησιαστικού κειμένου. Να αναφέρω ένα παράδειγμα σημαντικό, το οποίο ενδιαφέρει και τον κύριο Βασιλιάδη που ασχολείται με το πρόβλημα, με το θέμα της χειροτονίας των γυναικών. Ο Απόστολος Παύλος στο Ρωμαίους 16 στέλνει χαιρετίσματα σε μια σειρά από πρόσωπα, πολλά πρόσωπα, και μάλιστα υπάρχει το θέμα που γνώριζε τόσα πρόσωπα κλπ. Αλλά στέλνει και χαιρετίσματα στον Ανδρώνικον και τον Ιωνιάν κατά το κριτικό μας κείμενο. Αυτό εδώ, το δεύτερο όνομα, στα βυζαντινά χειρόγραφα είναι Ιουνία, είναι θηλυκό. Άλλωστε στην Εκκλησία εορτάζεται ο Ανδρώνικος και η Ιουνία ως ζευγάρι. Στην τελευταία έκδοση, την κριτική έκδοση Νέστλε Άλαντ, που έχετε αναλάβει τώρα εσείς, δεν ξέρω αν από την επόμενη ή ήδη και σε αυτήν την 28η, αναφέρει μερικές διαφορές εν σχέση, στην αρχή της εισαγωγής, αναφέρει μερικές διαφορές εν σχέση προς την 27η έκδοση. Και αν δει κανείς προσεκτικά αυτές τις αλλαγές, είναι αλλαγές προς το βυζαντινό κείμενο, στα 60%. Έκανα την καταμέτρηση και είδα ότι τα 60 στα 100 χωρία είναι προσαρμογή στο βυζαντινό κείμενο. Εντεύθεν και η τελευταία έκδοση έχει χαιρετίσματα προς Ανδρώνικον και Ιουνίαν, την γυναίκα Ιουνίαν και όχι τον Ιουνιάν, τον άνδρα. Βλέπετε εσείς να υπάρχει μια τέτοια με τους συνεργάτες που αρχίσατε ήδη να συνεργάζεστε μαζί τους, βλέπετε να υπάρχει μια τέτοια στροφή, διότι εκείνο που αντιμετώπισα εγώ στα πρώτα βήματα ήταν μια όχι στροφή αλλά μια αποστροφή προς το βυζαντινό κείμενο. Σε ποιον να το παραδώσω.
Από ό,τι κατάλαβα από το κείμενο, μια μετάφραση μπορεί να ασκήσει και μανιπουλατσιόν. Και μην ξεχνάμε τη φράση του Λουθύρου στο Bauernkrieg. Schreckt die Hunde tot. Αυτό είναι το πρώτο. Το δεύτερο είναι ότι στη Βίβλο μπορούν να επισημανθούν ορισμένα πράγματα τα οποία οδηγούν στην ελευθερία. Και αναφέρομαι στο Eugene με το Θεό της Εξόδου. Τι τοποθετείται επικεφαλής των 10 εντολών? Ανοχή Γιάχβε Ελοχέχα, εγώ είμαι ο Γιάχβε ο Θεός σου. Ασέρ χοτσετήκα μέρετς μητσράγιμουν λιμπέθα μεοδίμ, για τον οποίον ισχύει. Εγώ σε έβγαλα από τη γη της Αιγύπτου και από τον οίκο των δούλων. Και σε όλα τα απελευθερωτικά κινήματα επεκαλέσει κανείς το Θεό της εξόδου, όπως την τάση του ανθρώπου για τον νέο στο δεύτερο Ισαΐα. Τα αρχαία παρήλθον, χαρισονόθου, μπάου, βαχαδασόταν η μαγίδ και τα νέα εξαγγέλω ημίν. Μπετέρεμ τη τσμάχνα ασμία ετχέμ, πριν ηθάλουν σας τα κατέστησα ακουστά. Ευχαριστώ.
Υπάρχει κάποιος άλλος που θα ήθελε να υποβάλει κάποια ερώτηση, κύριε καθηγητά?
Συνέχεια της παρατήρησης του αγαπητού μας πατρός, θα υποβάλω πολύ σύντομη ερώτηση στον κύριο Φίλιπ Τάουνερ. Θα την υποβάλω στα αγγλικά. Do you think that what Michel Foucault described as a manipulation through any cultural or any activity can be transferred to the translation process and to the work of the Bible societies? Because I think it's much wider in Michel Foucault, and I don't know, in Suzanne and André Lefebvre's work, I'm not familiar with it, but I know that Foucault's criticism cannot be so easily underscored by what the Bible Society is doing with a translation project in various local areas. I understand that there is a contribution towards a liberation, but is it so important that we can give a definite answer to Michel Foucault's criticism? Η ερώτησή μου ήταν πολύ απλή. Εάν η περίπτωση του συσχετισμού μεταξύ της θεωρίας του Μισελ Φουκώ ότι κάθε δραστηριότητα έχει αυτό το στοιχείο του manipulation, πώς το λέμε, της χειραγώγησης. Μπορεί αυτό να ισχύει για την δουλειά που κάνουν οι βιβλικές εταιρείες, κυρίως στο μεταφραστικό τομέα, και έτσι κατά κάποιο τρόπο να είναι μία απάντηση ότι όχι, εμείς δεν το κάνουμε αυτό, εμείς αντιθέτως απελευθερώνουμε τις κοινωνίες.
Παρακαλώ τους κύριους συγκεκριτάς πρώτος εσείς, κύριε. Υπάρχει άλλος ένας. Είπαμε...
Ευχαριστούμε για τις εισηγήσεις. Για τον κύριο Phil Towner, να το πω στα ελληνικά και ύστερα στα αγγλικά. Υπάρχει αυτό το ζήτημα της εξουσίας και της δύναμης, αλλά υπάρχει και το ζήτημα του τι αισθάνεται, ποια είναι η αυτοσυνειδησία μιας κοινότητας για το αν η ίδια έχει δύναμη και εξουσία. Δηλαδή, πολλές φορές όταν κοιτάμε τις διάφορες εκκλησιαστικές αποχρώσεις, ακόμα και εδώ στην Ελλάδα, πολλές φορές ακούει κανείς και νιώθει ότι η Ορθόδοξη Εκκλησία νιώθει απειλούμενη από δυνάμεις άλλες του εξωτερικού, ενώ, ας πούμε, Ευαγγελικοί και Καθολικοί στην Ελλάδα νιώθουν τους εαυτούς τους ως μια μειονότητα. Οπότε και οι δύο πλευρές, κατά κάποιο τρόπο, νιώθουν ότι είναι οι απειλούμενες, κατά κάποιο τρόπο. Οπότε αυτό ίσως θα ήθελα να το δούμε. Mr. Towner, I'm asking about the self-consciousness of a community. For example, you were talking about one community may feel like it has power or not, but oftentimes one community can have the self-consciousness of being powerless. For example, in Greece, oftentimes the Orthodox Church perceives itself as being threatened by Protestants or Catholics worldwide, while Protestants and Catholics in Greece perceive themselves as minorities. And so there's a misperception there. Και το άλλο επίσης ερώτημα είναι, όπως δόθηκε το παράδειγμα για εκείνη την κοινότητα η οποία δεν ήθελε να αλλάξει αυτό το ταφ στη μετάφρασή της, μήπως εκεί δεν δίνεται η ευκαιρία για δύο κοινότητες να συναντηθούν. Δηλαδή, μήπως τελικά με αυτή η κοινότητα, επιμένοντας αυτό, δημιουργεί μια δική της εξουσία, μια δική της δύναμη και γίνεται σέκτα, αντί να ανοίγεται σε έναν διάλογο ο οποίος μπορεί να είναι επικοδομητικός. The other question is the example that you gave with the translation, the Vietnamese translation that you were saying, is it possible that by serving that community to that extent, that community, in a sense, becomes sectarian rather than and in a sense, manipulating and controlling power rather than coming into creative dialogue with other communities? Thank you.
Ευχαριστούμε για τις ερωτήσεις. Πάρα πολύ σύντομα θα προσπαθήσω. Στον καθηγητή κύριο Κωνσταντίνου, υπάρχουν νομίζω και οι δύο τάσεις και πολύ εύστοχα το παρατηρήσατε. Ασφαλώς υπάρχει τάση της ομογενοποίησης. Για λόγους οικονομίας του χρόνου δεν ανέφερα, ας πούμε, το δια 4 του Τατιανού, που είναι ακριβώς μια τέτοια προσπάθεια. Προφανώς υπάρχει ένα εκρεμές το οποίο κινείται στην ιστορία μεταξύ της ομογενοποίησης του κειμένου και της διαφορετικότητας και της ποικιλότητας, αλλά θα επαναλάβω αυτό το οποίο παρατηρεί ο Ντέιβιτ Πάρκερ, δεν είναι δική μου παρατήρηση, ότι τελικά η Εκκλησία δεν θέλησε να επιβάλλει αυτή την ομογενοποίηση με τη δύναμη της επιβολής και της εξουσίας που είχε να το κάνει αν ήθελε. Γιατί πραγματικά η Εκκλησία αν ήθελε μπορούσε να το κάνει και έχουμε τα παραδείγματα του Κορανίου και της Εβραϊκής Βίβλου που γίνεται αυτό. Το ότι η Εκκλησία τελικά δεν το κάνει σημαίνει ότι κρατάει ανοιχτή την πόρτα για τον πλουραλισμό και τη διαφορετικότητα των κειμένων, έστω και αν αυτό κάποιες φορές και κάποιους τους ενοχλεί και έστω και αν αυτό δημιουργεί και προβλήματα. Και δεν είναι ίσως η ιδανική κατάσταση που θα μπορούσε κάποιος να φανταστεί και δημιουργεί ενδεχομένως και κάποιες ανασφάλειες. Αλλά παρόλα αυτά υπάρχει στην Εκκλησία σαν πραγματικότητα και για τη δική μου ανάγνωση είναι εμπλουτισμός τελικά αυτό. Είναι πλούτος. Η φτώχεια είναι η μονοτονία του ενός και μόνο κειμένου. Έτσι το βλέπω εγώ προσωπικά. Τώρα στην παρατήρηση και ερώτηση του δασκάλου μου, του κυρίου Καραβιδόπουλου, πράγματι υπάρχει αυτή η τάση και το ξέρετε πάρα πολύ καλά και εν μέρει αυτή η τάση οφείλεται και στη δική σας παρουσία μέσα στην Επιτροπή. Εσείς ήσασταν αυτός ο οποίος μπήκατε σε μια επιτροπή η οποία είχε αυτό το κλίμα το αρνητικό για το βυζαντινό κείμενο και με την παρουσία σας μετατρέψατε αυτό το κλίμα σε θετικό. Και από εκεί και πέρα ακολούθησαν και άλλοι άνθρωποι και τώρα υπάρχουν άνθρωποι μέσα στην Επιτροπή οι οποίοι είναι πάρα πολύ θετικά διακείμενοι. Να αναφέρω τον Κλάους Βάχτελ και τον Ντέιβιτ Πάρκερ, αυτοί και οι δύο, αλλά και άλλοι. Είναι πάρα πολύ θετικοί προς το βυζαντινό κείμενο. Δεν έχει αλλάξει όμως ο στόχος του Νέστλε Άλαντ. Ο στόχος είναι η επιστροφή όσο πιο κοντά γίνεται στο αρχικώς εκδεδομένο κείμενο. Αυτός είναι ο στόχος. Και γι' αυτό το λόγο όμως πλέον οι άνθρωποι αυτοί θα έβλεπαν πολύ θετικά μια δεύτερη κριτική έκδοση του βυζαντινού κειμένου που δεν θα είχε αυτό το στόχο. Αλλά θα είχε ως στόχο την αποκατάσταση, όπως το λέει χαρακτηριστικά ο Κλάους Βάχτελ, του ύστερου βυζαντινού κειμένου, δηλαδή από τον 10ο αιώνα και μετά. 9ο-10ο αιώνα και μετά. Έτσι, μέχρι την άλωση της Κωνσταντινούπολης. Αυτό θα το ήθελαν, αλλά λένε οι ίδιοι εμείς δεν μπορούμε να το υπηρετήσουμε. Μακάρι να βρεθεί κάποιος να το υπηρετήσει. Και εκφράζω και εγώ εδώ αυτή την ευχή.
I hope I can be that smart. Miltiades, first of all to you. You have identified what I would call the dialectical problem. Power to the people on the one hand, or decision-making power to the institution on the other hand. I think, and you made reference to the political sort of translations like gender-neutral and that kind of thing. First of all, the safe place that I retreat to, being someone in the United Bible Society's fellowship and working for a Bible society, is the concept of the autonomy of the church and also the autonomy of the Bible Society in its own national area to make decisions. So by empowering the locality, the kind of thing that Eugene Nida did, largely in Protestant contexts, Protestant low church contexts initially, not he was not working with the great historic traditions of church history. In that context, yes, I would say, if you give the power to make decisions about translation to the people, anything could happen. But in practice, what happens is there is a dialogue going on with church leadership and translation team members. As in the case in Vietnam, church leadership had almost full control. As in the case of my experience with the Roman Catholic Church in the Vatican context, that there is control of translation models and methodologies from the top down. This is the way the church decides to do it. And this is something that I honor. It is not something I try to change. But I would say that no matter what the situation, when a membership of the church, when parishioners in a church receive the Bible in a language they understand, something is going to happen to them. On the one hand, that will be spiritual. It will bring about growth. It will bring about growth in Christ-likeness, we all hope. Cooperation and a spirit of cooperation. But that too is empowerment. It is not necessarily the result of such empowerment that we create in the churches revolutionaries who want to overthrow the system. But it is a dialogue and a dialectical situation that needs to be worked out among the people who make decisions and have authority in each context. So there is no prescription. Eugene Nida became one of the champions of interconfessional cooperation, by which, again, he did not mean we all have to become one church. Rather, we need to respect what is different and unique among that church and empower that church by assisting with translation so that they can continue to teach their traditions, to equip their people for the next generation, not to change them. Okay, so I don't have a clean answer. Yes, translation, when translators are empowered, when the locality is empowered, anything can happen. The institution of the church and its governing power then comes into play as well, and there is a dialogue that needs to be carried out. Your reference to Foucault, I appreciate that very much. So in a very brief paper, I was not really able to say all that I would say. So I need to make clear what I meant and what I didn't mean about Foucault. The fact is, Foucault's work eventually infects a lot of different discourses so that people begin to see that all kinds of discourse and communication and human activity can be a channel for exerting power. Translation is also one of those possibilities. But it is the critics of Nida who would go back to Foucault and then take a very suspicious view of what Eugene Nida was about as a propagandist and so forth. And I think I made reference to that in the paper as being a mistake. They did not understand. They did not share Eugene Nida's commitment to a mission. Instead, they took the easy secular approach of Foucault and looked at all of that with suspicion. So what Foucault has done, in my view, for translation studies is simply help us to understand that translating is a way of exerting power. It doesn't answer the question why or how it should be exerted, but it is an unavoidable exertion of power, and just like holding a loaded gun, you have to be very careful with it. So that is all I would say, but you're absolutely right. Eugene Nida was not a student of Foucault or a disciple of Foucault as such. Finally, in the back, I'm not sure that the comment about self-consciousness of this community in relation to that community is really a question for me. I acknowledge what you say, and this is certainly right, not just in Greece, but around the world in all kinds of communities. The point I would make again is that the translation of the Bible into modern language is a powerful tool for shaping Christian human identity. A bad translation will shape it badly. A good translation will have good effect, I hope. But larger issues of these relationships you mentioned remain, in my view, a kind of puzzle or a problem we need to continue to work on. With regard to the Vietnamese illustration, yes, I would say this probably was a decision that would foster sectarianism, that would build up the walls. They were happy to make this revision of a Bible their own, and it was a part of their own identity. Did that help them to better relate to Catholics or other Protestant traditions? Probably not. But again, the simple rule that I was operating by, I think, is the rule that the church is autonomous. I don't come to change the church, I come to serve the church. So I will have the academic argument with the translators as long as I think they can bear it. And sometimes I win, and sometimes we get improvements, in my view, that lead to better understanding. But this takes a long time. And ultimately what I must not do is use my power as a leader in that context, or rather I should say, I cannot abuse my power and insist on this or that. As they said to me, they could have made the change and these Bibles would have been printed and they would have sat on the shelf forever at the Bible house and in the Bible shops and would never have sold. So there is a commercial element involved in this too. One thing coming back to Miltiadis, one thing that complicates the whole business of politics and translation, especially in the US of A, is the fact that the commercial publishers have all the power in determining how a Bible will be translated and which audiences they will serve. And right now, the three best-selling Bibles are in the control of Rupert Murdoch, who owns the publishers in the USA. That's all I will say. I'm not saying that in approval, by the way. That's a comment.